Okay, so once again, welcome to our webinar. The purpose of this webinar is to introduce the software version 6.2. It's been out for a little while, so you might be a little familiar with it already, but hopefully this webinar will still help everyone understand the changes. And as a note, this webinar is designed for researchers who are familiar with the software already, rather than researchers who are just coming to the software. If you have never used LI-6400 software before, you may find that this webinar is a little bit confusing, but hopefully you'll still be able to get something out of it. If you've used the software before, you'll probably be fairly comfortable with the pace we're moving and what we're doing. The way we're going to do this is we're going to talk about some big changes first, and then we're going to talk about some little changes. And we're also going to have some live demos so that we can walk through things. I do want to note that not every detail of the changes in 6.2 are covered. For that, we have a PDF, which is also creatively titled What's New in Open 6.2. And I believe we will have a link to that at the end of the webinar that we'll be able to send you via email so you can look at it. It's also available on our website already, so if you get impatient and you want to see it before we send it to you, you can do that. Okay, let's get started. The main first difference is going to be in the environmental control panel. The old look, which is on the left, is kind of a table structure where you choose your options, letters, and then you choose, within the letter, you choose an option or an actual number. On the right, we have the new look, which is a tree structure. And this is more consistent with the rest of the software. We started using the tree structure in limited ways in 6.1, and so what we're trying to do is make sure that everything is on the tree structure. In the end, that makes it really consistent and easier for you to move through it, but it also means that if you haven't used the tree structure before, you may find it a little bit uncertain as to where you're supposed to be going and what you're supposed to be doing. So hopefully this will elucidate what's going on here. The most important thing to notice about the new tree structure is that it is a dialog box, just like in Windows or Mac or Linux, where you can say cancel or apply or whatever you want to say. You do have to confirm what you want to do, either cancel or keep. So you see that F4 is going to be cancel, F5 is going to be keep, and you do have to choose one of those options. Before, you could just kind of press enter and, and then things would move on. But you do have to actually confirm what you want to do in this case. So let's actually go through an example, a non-live example. We'll go through a live example in a little bit. Say that I want to control humidity via flow rate. So what I'll do is I'll arrow down from flow, and I will choose control options, and I'll press edit, which is F2, and it'll say, okay, for flow control, you can do off, you can do flow rate, you can do mole fraction, you can do relative humidity, you can do vapor pressure deficit. These are not new options. Everybody should be familiar with them. But so what you'll do is you'll pick one by using your arrow keys. And then after you pick that, you'll go down to target. So the same thing that we did before in the table in one line, we now do in the tree in 2 lines, just to make sure that everybody's clear on what type of control we're using and what the actual control is. So we're going to go ahead and choose target, and then we'll use the keypad to enter in whatever target we want. One detail here is that using C allows you to use the current value, and it also tells you what it is. In an earlier version of the software, you had to kind of try to remember what the number was, and especially in the case of H2O control, if you misplace a tenth of a millimole, it can make a big difference between your flow rate being constant and your flow rate jumping all over the place from 37 to 737, which is a little bit stressful for your plant sometimes, depending on the plant. So now we can tell it C, and it will use the current value, whatever that value is. So that's a really nice little detail. The next thing we're going to do is actually walk through a live demo. The best way to understand software changes is usually to walk through them, and hopefully you'll be walking through this on your own once we finish the webinar and you're a little bit more familiar with the software, but we're also going to walk through it now. But first, before we walk through the live stuff, while I get myself all set up, why don't we do a poll?
That sounds like a good idea, Elizabeth. Let me get the poll up on the screen here. It looks like our question is, what version of the LI-6400 open software do you currently have on your instrument? And you can choose from version 6X, 5X, 4X or below, or you're not sure. So go ahead and choose the radio button next to your response, and we'll give everyone just a few moments to finish.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and close that poll and we'll move on to the live demo. It's interesting to see that we have a good mix. We usually have a mix. We have a few people who are not sure what software they have, and that's understandable. If you don't have the instrument right next to you, sometimes it's hard to understand or remember what that particular number is. So, okay, let me get my LI-6400XT woken up. As you can see, I'm connected via Ethernet, and I'm not even next to this instrument. It's actually on a completely different floor in a completely different part of our building. But that's the benefit of the Ethernet connection. I can be here, and it can be there, and there's still measurements or potential measurements going on. So let me just wake up my instrument, and then I'll exit out of the utility menu, and I'll go on into new measurements mode. So the environmental control level is level 2, as always, and nothing has changed here. We still have our different options. Let's look at our mixer options as an example. So I'm going to press F3, mixer, and my CO2 control types are reference, sample, control signal, and leaf intercellular CO2. Most of these are not new. The one thing that is new is this leaf intercellular CO2, and I'm going to go ahead and choose that one. CI, which is our calculation of how much CO2 is in the leaf, is a useful variable for understanding the way things are moving within and without the cell and the leaf. So sometimes you want to keep CI constant to know that it's not a variable, even if you change light or CO2, or, well, if you change CO2, it'll change. But if you change light or temperature or humidity or something like that, you want to know that CI stays the same. So you see that what I can do is I can say I want to control on CI, and then I can specify what I want the CI variable to be. It would make sense in most cases for me to consider the CI variable to be CI, but if for some reason I wanted to change that variable and use a separate variable, perhaps a variable I created so I could do my own calculations, the software would let me do that. The other thing I have is that I can change my target, and I can tell the instrument what plant type I have. Now, the reason I have the option to tell what plant type is because C3 and C4 plants have two completely different carbon concentrating mechanisms, and so we tell the instrument what plant type we have, and therefore, for our own knowledge as well as the instruments, we know what we would expect, because C4 CI values are typically significantly lower than the values for C3 plants. And so, you know, if I saw that I was working with a C4 plant and it was logged in my data that it was a C4 plant, but I had CI values for a C3 plant, well, you know, I might be calling tech support to try to figure out what was going on with that. So I'm going to say that, yeah, I want to control on CI, and that I want my target to be this and my plant type to be that. But I'm actually not going to do that because I don't have a plant attached. So, and I don't actually have a CO2 cartridge attached either. So I probably shouldn't try to control on CO2. So that is a quick run through of the mixer control, and all the rest of them are the same with the targets and then the control options. It's all the same, although the numbers and the parameters do change. Ashley, have we received any audience questions?
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. We do have a question from the audience, and the first question is, Are there any shortcuts for the new control panel format?
Good question. Yes, there are. The letter T and the letter O are both shortcuts. T resets the target using the same control type and then exits. O turns the control off and just exits. So if you just want to reset the target using the same control type, press T, type in your number, and it'll go. If you just want to turn everything off, just press O and then everything will turn off. Of course, you have to be careful with turning controls off because you can do bad things when you could turn controls off. Plants don't like it when you reduce their CO2 or light level. Their photosynthesis rates tend to react to that. So, okay, well, let's go on to the next big thing, big change. And the next big change is going to be in the auto program structure. Auto programs, if you're not familiar with them, are little programs in the 6400 software that allow you to tell the instrument what you'd like to do. And then the instrument will do those things that you ask it to do, and you can go off and get a cup of coffee or focus on another thing, and the instrument does the work for you. And it's a really useful ability to be able to tell the instrument to do what you want and then have it do it. The main difference in the auto programs, as you can see, is that this is also a tree structure. So you can see the whole auto program at once, and you can organize your settings in whatever order you like. The previous version of the software was a set of questions and answers, and if you answered a configuration question, perhaps not the way you wanted to, you couldn't really go back. You would have to go through all the rest of the questions, start the auto program, abort the auto program, and go back and do it again. This way, you can change them all 15 times before you actually press start, if you really want to, or you can press cancel and go back to new measurements mode without actually starting an auto program at all. The other thing you can see from this is that the auto programs are adaptable based on the light source. So instead of having FLIR light curve and light curve, which were for fluorescence and not fluorescence, instead we just have light curve 2, which if you have a fluorometer attached, the instrument figures that out and changes your options for the auto program based on that. We also have some new names. Most of them are very simple, very easy to remember, like light curve 2 and ACI curve 2 and autolog 2. So let's look at what the expanded tree looks like in an auto program. On the top, you can see what would happen if we had a fluorometer configured and we decided we wanted to do a dark pulse. So we say yes, and it gives us extra values. It says dark time, minutes before F prime, FM rather. And then we have light time afterwards, and it says measure each dark photo and save each flash, things like that. Okay, so, and on the bottom, you see that we have chosen not to do a dark pulse. So it doesn't ask us what dark time we want, what light time we want. Instead, it asks us what F0 and FM value we want, which we must have had from another attempt to do an auto program or another dark pulse. We have to have that information to dark adapt the instrument or to have that information in the fluorescence auto program, but we don't necessarily have to do it now. So the other detail about the new auto programs is that we do have a couple of new curves. Along with having light curve and ACI curve and auto log that we had before and that we've named ACI curve 2, etc., we also have some nested curves. Nested curves allow you to change a CO2 concentration while at the same light level and then move on. So we have nested light and CO2 and then nested CO2 and light. And the difference between those is whether you change the light level and within that change the CO2 level or change the CO2 level and within that change the light level. The benefit of this is that you can find out both light and CO2 reactions in the same curve. And it's sort of a combination of doing an ACI curve and an AQ curve. It also helps make the very pretty graph that is on the title slide of this webinar. And now we're going to go ahead and walk through the auto program changes since, again, the best way to see it is to actually do it. But first, before we do that, while I get myself all set up again, I think we have another poll.
All right, Elizabeth. The question this time is, which auto program do you use most often? The answers are CO2 response, light response, auto log, or I don't use auto programs. And there's also an option for other if you use something else. So go ahead and click the radio button next to your response, and we'll give everyone just a few moments.
Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll. It looks like the majority of you do not use auto programs, which is fine. You know, some experimental questions don't lend themselves to auto programs, and perhaps you didn't know about the power of auto programs. But you certainly don't have to use them, but they are a nice option. So let's go ahead and look at an auto program now. I'm going to go to menu level 5 in the software, which is the auto program and logging options level. And I'm going to press F1 auto prog. And I'm going to choose ACI curve 2 because I did a lot of ACI curves in graduate school, and so it's kind of my friend. So I'm going to select that one using F5. And it says, do I want to append? And I do. Okay, so here we are in our auto log setup, and you see that we have several different options. We have our summary node, our stability node, and our log options node. It's all in the same screen. If I expand the summary node, you can see that I can tell it how I want to control CO2, and I can also tell it what CO2 concentrations I want. So let me edit this and show you a nice little feature. I'm going to add a space here. And look, a little arrow appeared over here. Sometimes what used to happen is that you would set up your auto program with 5 or 6 points, and then you would start your auto program, and suddenly there were 13 points, and your plant was being sent to a different point that you expected. And it's just a matter of what has happened. Has my instrument become possessed? And what happened was that there was something scrolled off to the left that you didn't see, and so you didn't clear. Now this tells us if there's something scrolled off to the left so that we can go over there and find out how much it is and whether we need to go ahead and remove it. But I'm going to go ahead and say enter because that concentration is fine. The other thing I want to point out is we do have some new matching options. We can tell the instrument to match before we log always, conditionally, or never. And generally, you should not choose never, especially if you're using an ACI curve, because we're going to be changing the CO2 concentration quite a bit, and being able to match is very important. But if I do choose to match if one of conditionally, then I can tell it I want to match based on elapsed time, based on CO2 change, based on delta CO2. Any of these are options. The other thing I have down here is my stability definitions. I can tell the LI-6400 how to define stable before it begins to match and then log. I can also change my log options. So I could, for example, turn off the beep. And you know, if you're doing an auto log once every second, that beep may essentially drive you nuts. So you might want to turn that off. So that's the main look at a new auto program. And I'm going to go ahead and cancel this because, as I said, I don't have a plant, so I don't want to actually take any measurements or start a CO2 auto program or anything like that. Ashley, do we have any more questions yet?
Yeah, I do have a question. Someone has asked, can I still use the old auto programs?
I understand that. You know, you get used to using the old auto programs. You've built your research program around the old auto programs, and then we have these new auto programs. The old auto programs are still there. If you upgrade to version 6.2 from an older version of the software, you'll need to navigate to User, Configs, autoprogs_old. But we recommend you use the new ones. They have a lot of good features, and we've got the new match options, the scrolling arrow, things that are really good. But if you really do want to use the old ones, they are still there. Okay. Let's go on to some smaller changes, things that aren't quite requiring of a demo, just a discussion. The first thing is that we do have a new faster zeroing option in version 6.2, which you'll find on level 2 of the IRGA zeroing screen. Level 1 hasn't changed at all, so that's going to be the same familiar IRGA zeroing screen you know and love, or hopefully know and love. On level 2, though, you can zero just the reference line and then have the sample match the reference. This particular option is especially beneficial for larger chambers that take a really long time for CO2 or H2O to be scrubbed out. For example, if you're using a custom chamber and you're trying to scrub it out, it can take a really long time for that. And now we can do it faster. The second change is that we've now got an option for mass-based measurements. Sometimes it's easier to measure the mass of something instead of the area, especially if you're working with soil, or you're working with small leaves, or you're working with fruits, or, seeds or something like that. We always actually had a hidden mass-based option, but it required you to enter the mass in decigrams, which most people don't think in decigrams. Now you have that as an option in the configuration, so you can choose needles, broadleaves, or mass-based. And along the lines, you may be looking at behind the select material box and noticing that the config builder has changed. Again, it's the tree structure. LI-COR, we like plants, we like trees, we have trees in our programming. So here, all the elements of the configuration are visible, just like in the auto programs and the environmental control options, which means that it's not a step-by-step question series about what's your light source, what's your material, what's your leaf temperature. And so all of these things can be changed multiple times, as many times as you want to, again. And then when you're done, go ahead and press F5, do it. Or F4, cancel if you decide that suddenly you don't really want to make this configuration. Either way, it's up to you, and you can see all of your options. And as you see, they all expand as the normal way that things do. So there are options underneath. Okay, another change is that we have some new applications. You may have noticed from the application that I was using, it didn't much look like the Xterm that you might have on your computer. We have new applications for Windows, we have them for Linux, and we have them for Mac. So whatever operating system you have, unless it's one of the really fringe operating systems, we probably have a control application for you. One detail is that you may have noticed that File Exchange or FileX has disappeared. Now we just have Group Sim and Xterm. File Exchange is going to be part of Xterm. So, your File Exchange options are still there. They're just not a separate program. We're trying to kind of consolidate. In terms of other 6400 app updates that are sort of related to 6.2, but also happen to come out about the same time, so I might as well talk about them. We've updated our iPad control and graphing application, and you can see that new version at the top right. The new graph allows you to look at all the graphs generated at once, which is really nice because rather than scrolling through all the graphs, you can use the screen real estate of an iPad to look at everything at once. As usual, the update is free, and it's available on iTunes. Just search for LI-COR, and it should give you that app. Make sure you don't download the one for the iPhone or the iPod Touch if you need the iPad app, though, because it really doesn't look right. On the left is the thick gasket kit, which is designed to measure thick or cylindrical leaves. It can be used with any of our 2x3 centimeter leaf chambers, and it has more squishy gaskets and a squishier hinge to help the gasket seal around your stem or your leaf or your vein or your petiole or whatever plant element is making your measurements just a little bit more complicated and a little bit more leaky, perhaps. So that's a good option for you. On the bottom is the bryophyte chamber, which is built on the same design as our whole plant Arabidopsis chamber that came out a couple of years ago. With this chamber, you have two options. You can put a little plug of bryophyte either on a screen, if your bryophyte likes having air all the way around it, or you can put it in a small indentation so that the air passes over it only. As you can see in the picture, you can provide light with the RGB light source, or you can use a clear chamber. And hopefully this will help our researchers who are working with bryophytes and mosses and little things that are not so easy to get into a standard leaf chamber. So that's about it. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, I didn't cover every bit of the changes in 6.2, but hopefully I've given you a good overview of the primary new stuff. We'll send you a link to the PDF, as I mentioned, and of course you can always call us or email us and ask us where on earth we put that one thing that you always use and now you can't find it. We will be happy to help you find it. Ashley, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we've had several along the way, but I've been pushing most of them to our panelists. But I did save one for you. The question is, how do I get version 6.2, and does it cost anything?
Yeah, that's an important detail. Probably should have mentioned that since I'm talking about version 6.2. You can download the software from our website, LI-COR.com, if you have version 5 or above, and it's free. If you have software version 4 or below, you will need to purchase the digital board upgrade to use version 6.2. Contact our sales or tech support department for more information about getting that digital board upgrade, and we'll be happy to help you out. Well, I think that's just about the end of our webinar, but because it is March 14th, I did want to add a tiny little note. Happy Pi Day to everyone, since it is 3/14.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That's all the time that we have, so I hope everyone's questions were answered today. And if you haven't received an answer, just stick around. Our panelists are still working on the questions that you've already submitted. If you'd like to continue your conversation with the panelists, you may do so offline via email or phone. And I'd also like to inform you that an on-demand replay of this presentation will be posted to our website soon, so watch your email. Or you can visit www.LI-COR.com/env/webinars for more information. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.